Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Vanishing Room 217, the motel's shifting hallway. The road had been relentless that day, endless stretches of cracked asphalt, the kind where the yellow lines faded into dirty ribbons, and the horizon melted into a heat-soaked haze. I pulled up the highway with a sigh that tasted of exhaustion and stale coffee. The air smelled faintly of diesel and dry grass, a scent I knew but never welcomed. I'd been chasing the idea of rest, but now I wondered if I'd find it here. The motel looked like most roadside joints, 2 stories of peeling paint, a cracked parking lot speckled with oil stains, and a lobby with a glass door that stuck just enough to remind me it wasn't brand new. Inside, the air was cool but stale, a mixture of old carpet, faint bleach, and something unplaceable, like forgotten memories. Behind the counter was a woman who looked as worn as the place itself. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and she wore thin reading glasses perched near the tip of her nose. She glanced up as I approached, her eyes settling on me with a kind of polite fatigue. "Room for the night?" she asked, voice low but steady. "Yeah. Just one." She tapped a few keys on the ancient register, then slid a laminated floor plan across the counter. "You're in 217. Second floor, end of the hall to the right." I nodded, thumbed the key card she handed over, and glanced at the map. The layout was basic, 2 long hallways intersected by a shorter one, forming a sort of L shape. I traced the route with a finger that trembled just a little, maybe from the day's weariness or the creeping unease that sometimes follows being alone in a strange place. The elevator creaked to life, a reluctant groan that felt like the building was waking from a deep sleep. As the doors opened on the second floor, the dim fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a pale, uneven glow down the narrow hallway. The carpet was threadbare underfoot, its faded floral pattern all but erased by years of footsteps and neglect. I walked, the tap of my shoes muffled, the quiet hum of the air conditioning the only other sound. Room numbers flicked by, 201, 203, 205, and so on. But when I reached what should have been 217, there was only a blank, featureless stretch of wall. I stopped, blinked, and looked back down the hall, then forward again. No door. No number. Nothing but peeling paint and a faint scuff mark where a door frame might once have been. Frowning, I pulled the floor plan from my pocket, unfolding it carefully. It showed 217 clearly marked, right at the end of the hall on the right, the same spot where I now stood facing emptiness. I looked around. The hallway stretched in both directions, but the layout didn't match the map. The corridor to the right curved awkwardly, leading to another identical hallway. The numbers repeated, or so it seemed: 213, 215, 213, 215. My head tilted. Was I seeing things? A low creak echoed behind me. I spun around, heart nudging upward in rhythm, but no one was there. Just the dim hallway fading into silence. I tried the door to 215, locked. 213, also locked. The walls were solid, the paint chipped and rough beneath my fingertips. The air had a faint metallic tang now, like the taste of blood in a mouth after biting your tongue, though I hadn't done so. I took a breath, trying to steady my thoughts. Maybe this was some kind of mistake. I could go back downstairs, talk to the clerk, get a new key. But when I turned to retrace my steps, my feet moved forward instead, down the hallway I'd just come from. The same numbers stared back at me, the same threadbare carpet, the same flickering lights. The space felt smaller, tighter somehow, as if the building was shrinking around me. Room after room passed. Empty. Silent. The stale smell thickened, mingling with a faint dampness that clung to the air, making me wrinkle my nose. I stopped, pressed my back against the wall. The hallway was too quiet now, the usual hum of the night replaced by a hollow stillness that pressed in on my ears. "Hello?" I tried the word softly, but it felt swallowed by the emptiness. No response. Not even a creak or groan from the building settling. I swallowed hard. The keycard felt cool and smooth in my pocket, a small, solid proof that I wasn't imagining this. But where was my room? Where was 217? I pulled the floor plan out again, frowning at the lines and squares. The layout didn't make sense. It was as if the building's insides had shifted, rearranged themselves while I wasn't looking. I shook my head, a dry laugh escaping me. Okay, weird motel. Got it. The thought didn't comfort me. I tried the stairwell at the end of the hall, its metal door cold and unyielding. Locked. No sign of an elevator shaft either, just more corridors curling away like veins. I moved forward, step by step, the carpet soft underfoot, the walls closing in. There were no other guests. No sounds from other rooms, no televisions, no muffled conversations, no laughter or coughing. Just me, the hum of flickering bulbs overhead, and the faint, persistent scent of damp plaster and something else I couldn't place. Old fabric? Dust? The kind of smell that clings to forgotten places. A door down the hall creaked open suddenly, slow and deliberate. I froze, breath caught. But no one appeared. The door swung gently on its hinges, then closed with a soft click. I tried to call out again, but my voice was caught in my throat. Panic fluttered in my chest, subtle but insistent. I tried to think. This had to be some mistake, some bizarre coincidence. Maybe I'd been given the wrong key, or the map was outdated. Maybe the clerk was tired, or the building was under renovation. Yet every hallway I took led me back to the same place, the same empty rooms, the same flickering lights. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the wall, feeling the rough plaster beneath my fingers, grounding myself. I realized then that something was wrong. Not just a little wrong. The kind of wrong that makes you question everything you thought you knew when you locked the door and turned off the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows that first night. I was trapped, and the motel was watching. The hallway felt colder still, the stale air settling deep in my lungs as I stood there, pressed against that rough plaster wall. I opened my eyes and forced myself forward. The room numbers were a cluster of near-identical digits, 214, 215, 216. None of them was my assigned room, 217. I checked the faded map again, taped crookedly on the lobby wall. The layout stopped at 216. Number 217 anywhere. A mistake? Maybe. But the map was old, yellowed with age, and someone had clearly taken time to post it behind the plastic frame. I ran my fingers over the print, squinting under the buzz of the fluorescent light that threatened to give out any second. I decided I couldn't just wait. I had to know what was going on. I needed answers. I tried the elevator first. The buttons were sticky under my fingertips, worn down from years of use. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator shuddered, groaned, and then shuddered again before the lights inside blinked out. It was dead. I guessed maintenance had either forgotten about it or deliberately disabled it. No surprise there. I stepped back and looked down the corridor to the left. The hall stretched out, lined with doors that all looked the same, scuffed paint, peeling stickers, faded numbers. Silence hung thick in the air, unbroken but for the faint hum of the refrigeration units somewhere behind the walls. I could hear the buzz of a distant street lamp. Somewhere far off, A dog barked. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and started walking. Each step echoed off the cracked linoleum floor. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every turn. I tried to memorize the pattern, counting the doors, noting the placement of fire extinguishers and emergency lights, but it was pointless. The hallway curved, but when it did, it brought me back to the same place, an identical intersection that I was sure I'd passed before. I stopped, breathing uneven. I pressed my palm to the wall, feeling the cool plaster. I could smell something faint, like mildew mixed with cigarette smoke. It was stale, like the building hadn't been properly aired out for years. The light flickered overhead, and for a moment, the darkness behind me seemed to stretch longer, deeper. I turned quickly, but no one was there. I tried the door at the end of the hall. Locked. Not just locked, but bolted from the other side. I rattled the handle, my knuckles white, but it wouldn't budge. The metal was cold beneath my fingers, unyielding. I backed away. The thought that someone else might be here, someone watching, made my skin crawl. I listened. No footsteps. No whispers. Just that low, constant hum and the distant barks fading into the night. Back near the lobby, I spotted a janitor's cart abandoned in the corner. It looked recent, the mop head was damp, and the cleaning spray bottle still half full. I rifled through it, hoping for a walkie-talkie or even a cell phone left behind. Nothing. Just a couple of dusty rags and a faded schedule taped inside the side panel. I unfolded the paper carefully. It was a list of daily tasks: check room locks, clean lobby, replace bulbs. Nothing unusual except the hours. Every shift ended at midnight. No staff after that, it seemed. No one else around right now. I read and reread the list until the edges curled in my hands. I needed more information. I decided to try the office behind the lobby desk. The door was ajar, the lock hanging loose. Inside, the room smelled of stale coffee and old paper. Dust coated the surface of the desk, but the computer was still on, the screen filled with a jumble of files and open tabs. I sat down carefully, fingers trembling as I moved the mouse. The desktop was a mess, cluttered with folders named guests, maintenance, and security logs. I clicked on the guest list. My name was there, but the room number was blank. Odd. I scrolled down further. There were dozens of entries, but many were incomplete or crossed out, the letters smudged as if someone had tried to erase them. I found a file labeled Incidents and opened it with a flicker of hope. Most entries were mundane complaints: broken air conditioners, noisy neighbors, but then something caught my eye. Dated just a few weeks ago, a report mentioned a guest who had disappeared. No follow-up, no explanation. Just a note: last seen near room 217. Staff unable to locate. I swallowed hard. That couldn't be a coincidence. The door behind me creaked. I spun around. Empty hallway. I glanced back at the screen, then toward the door. I wasn't alone. Not yet, but I sensed it coming. The motel was waking up. I grabbed the logbook from the desk and stuffed it into my jacket. I needed to find whoever was running this place and get answers. If I was trapped, then at least I could try to play their game on my terms. Outside the office, I paused, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows that stretched and recoiled with the buzzing hum. I thought about the missing guest, about the locked doors and the endless maze. I thought about the voices I heard, low and deliberate, dragging through the halls like a warning. I thought about how this motel had swallowed me whole. I turned down the nearest hallway, the logbook heavy in my pocket, and stepped into the dark. Something was definitely watching. And this time, I was going to find out who. The hallway behind me swallowed the door's faint creak, leaving only the buzz of the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. There was no way I was turning back to the office. Not yet. If someone was watching, I had to find them first. But every step I took seemed to loop me deeper into this maze, the identical beige walls closing in. The pattern was maddening: rooms with the same peeling wallpaper, the same cracked plastic light switches, the same threadbare carpets. I ran my fingers along the rough plaster as I passed, searching for any difference, any inconsistency. Nothing. I tried the door numbers against the floor plan again, now more insistently, like the numbers might shift if I stared long enough. But room 217 wasn't there. Number 217 on the map, number 217 in the sequence. The motel's layout ended at 216, and then it folded back on itself. Which meant my room was a ghost. A ghost that I was trapped inside. That realization hit me hard, like a slap to the face. I stepped back, my hands trembling. I was stuck. Completely stuck. Not just physically but mentally too. The motel wasn't just a building, it was a trap, a puzzle designed to disorient and confuse. And whoever was running it knew exactly how to keep me on edge. I heard it then, a faint shuffling sound, like the scraping of bare feet against the worn carpet. I froze. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, and it wasn't mechanical. It was slow, deliberate. Human. I edged toward the nearest door, pressing my ear against the cold wood. Silence. Then a low, almost imperceptible breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough that I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. Is someone there? No answer. Just that breath, steady and calm. I backed away, heart racing. The air grew colder, sharper, and the metallic smell thickened. I fingered the logbook through my jacket again. The scribbled notes, the names crossed out, the cryptic remarks about guests who don't check out. Guests who don't check out. That phrase wasn't just a metaphor anymore. I tried the door I'd come in through. Locked. No handle. Just a smooth panel where the knob should have been. I slammed my shoulder against it, then my fists, but it didn't budge. Panic started to rise, a raw, hot wave that made my vision blur. I backed away, gasping. Okay, I told myself, trying to breathe through the tightening in my chest. Think. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, desperate for a different exit. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every step, the ceiling lights flickering faster, the buzzing rising to a high-pitched whine that made my ears ache. I tried another door. Locked too. At the end of the hall, a stairwell. I pushed the door open, relief flooding me. But the stairs twisted down into darkness, too steep and narrow to see the bottom. The smell was stronger here, damp earth, rot, and something faintly coppery. I hesitated, but the need for escape pushed me forward. Step by step, the cold concrete stairs groaned underfoot. I reached the bottom and found myself in a narrow basement corridor. The walls here were bare concrete, cold and damp. Flickering bulbs cast long shadows. I hurried along, the logbook still tucked close, until I hit a dead end. A heavy metal door, bolted shut from the other side. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing but silence. My breath came in ragged gasps. The chill seeped into my bones. Then, a faint tapping. Soft, deliberate. Coming from the wall beside me. I spun around, heart pounding. No one. I ran my fingers along the cold concrete, searching for a crack, a loose panel. My fingers caught on a small switch, recessed into the wall like a secret. I pressed it without thinking. The metal door in front of me slid open with a grinding hiss. Cold air rushed in, sharp and fresh, like the outside world was just beyond reach. I stepped forward into a narrow alley, the night sky a sliver of dark blue above. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows. I was outside, or at least I thought I was. A figure stepped out of the shadows ahead, blocking the alley. Tall, lean, unshaven. His eyes glinted with a calm menace. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. I swallowed. "I'm leaving." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No one leaves." His voice was low, almost friendly, but the threat was clear. No tool, no yelling, just the certainty that escape was impossible. Behind him, the alley ended in a high, barbed fence. No way forward, no way back. I looked around, heart racing. The motel's maze had spat me out here, but the trap was still closing. I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing the logbook's rough cover. The notes, the names, the warnings, they weren't just stories. They were instructions. And now I was part of it. The figure stepped closer. "You want answers? You have to play the game." My mouth went dry. I nodded, because what choice did I have? The point of no return wasn't a moment. It was a place. And I was standing in it. The motel had me, body, mind, and soul. And it wasn't done with me yet. The dim light flickered as the door creaked open behind me, shadows stretching long and thin. The door groaned shut behind me, sealing the alley in shadow. The air smelled sharp, like spilled gasoline and damp concrete, with a faint metallic tang that made my throat tighten. Somewhere far off, a dog barked long, mournful, and oddly lonely. The sound bounced off the motel walls and vanished, swallowed by the thick night. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me, though the night was surprisingly warm. "I don't want to play any game," I said, voice cracking despite myself. The stranger tilted his head, eyes gleaming in the weak light. "You don't get to choose. Not here." He took a step closer, but there was no rush in his movement. More like patience. Like a cat circling a mouse, waiting for it to tire itself out. I swallowed again, fingers curling into fists. The logbook's rough cover was still in my pocket, a weight of cold paper and ink. I could almost feel the names written there, the stories whispered between those pages, each one a warning, a thread in some twisted tapestry. And now, somehow, I was woven into it. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" His smile flickered, slower this time, more like a shadow passing over a face. "Answers come with questions. And questions aren't free." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the narrow gap between the fence and a rusted dumpster overflowing with trash bags. "You want out? You'll have to find it. But every choice, every turn, it's all part of the game." I hesitated, the alley's stale air pressing down on me. The wall seemed to lean in, closing the space until it felt like I was trapped inside a thin, suffocating tube. My hands trembled, fingers itching to pull the logbook out, to find some clue I hadn't seen before. But what good would it do if the maze itself was alive, shifting like sand beneath my feet? "Fine," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "What's the first move?" The stranger's eyes locked onto mine, cold and sharp. "Find room 217. You're already closer than you think." Before I could ask, he vanished into the shadows, swallowed by the night as silently as he had appeared. The alley felt emptier, colder, and somehow heavier. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I glanced at the fence again. No gaps. No loose wires. No way through. So I turned, walking back toward the motel's main entrance. The flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, vacancy, but the letters were patchy, some bulbs dead, others sputtering weakly. The lobby was quiet, the dull hum of the air conditioner the only sound. I scanned the floor plan pinned behind the reception desk, eyes darting over the neat rows of rooms. Room 217 wasn't listed. Not on the first floor, not on the second. It simply didn't exist. I ran my fingers over the laminated paper, the texture rough and sticky with fingerprints, and a sudden cold dread squeezed my stomach. This whole place was a lie. A trap. The rooms, the hallways, even the floor plan, it was all designed to confuse, to disorient. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffling from the hallway beyond the lobby. Slow, deliberate steps. Not far off, but hidden just out of sight. I froze. My skin prickled. "Hello?" I called, voice louder than I intended. No answer. Just the echo of footsteps, fading, then returning. I edged toward the hallway, each step careful, trying not to make a sound. The corridor stretched before me, walls painted a sickly yellow, stained with water damage and dirt. The single row of flickering overhead lights buzzed intermittently, throwing long shadows that danced and twisted. I passed room after room, identical doors, identical faded curtains, identical stale smells of mildew and old carpet. The air was thick, almost suffocating. Then I saw it, room 217. The door looked new, the paint fresh, the number clean and bright. Out of place, like a wound in the fabric of this decaying motel. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. It was cold to the touch, smooth and unyielding. I hesitated. Inside, the room was empty but for a single chair, facing the window. The curtains were drawn back, revealing a cracked mirror hanging on the opposite wall. I stepped in, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed, sharp and final. I spun around, heart pounding, and yanked at the handle. Locked. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Silence. Complete silence. The mirror caught my reflection, but something was wrong. The room looked smaller than it should have. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. My reflection blinked slowly, matching me, but the light behind me flickered again, and for a split second, the glass rippled like water. I shook my head, trying to dispel the feeling. I wasn't imagining things. Was I? A soft tapping noise drew my attention. From somewhere inside the room, a rhythmic, deliberate sound. Fingertips drumming on wood or glass. I spun, eyes scanning every corner. The chair. The window. The thin curtains. Nothing. Then, a voice. Low, almost a whisper, coming from the vent near the ceiling. Do you see it now? I swallowed hard, pressing my back against the door. Who's there? No answer. Just the tapping again. Slower this time. Like a heartbeat. I slid down, sitting on the floor, knees pulled up. The air smelled stale, like trapped dust and something else. Something metallic. The tapping stopped. Silence. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. I couldn't tell. Then, a faint sound. A shuffle. Something moving in the hallway outside. I scrambled up, pounding on the door. Help. Someone, please. The voice returned, softer now. Help. No one helps here. A cold realization settled over me. This wasn't a random trap. It was personal. I pressed my ear again to the door, listening. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Then a whisper. "Welcome to the game." The lock clicked. The door creaked open, just enough to let a sliver of light through. And standing there was the stranger with that same unsettling smile. I forced myself to stand, face him. "What do you want?" He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room like a predator sizing up prey. "Your choices," he said simply. "Every step, every turn, they're all watched. And you've already lost more than you know." I swallowed, bracing myself. "Then tell me," I said, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "How do I win?" He laughed, a soft, hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. "There's no winning. Only surviving. And right now, you're running out of time." The light flickered again, the room plunging into near darkness. My skin prickled. The air grew colder. And in the shadows, I knew the real game was only just beginning. The moment I stepped into the lobby, something about the place felt off. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly, uneven glow on the faded carpet. I glanced up at the floor plan pinned crookedly behind the front desk. It was a simple rectangle, a basic layout, rooms 101 through 110 on the right wing, 111 through 120 on the left. But the key card the clerk handed me was for room 117B. The B wasn't on the map anywhere. I mentioned it casually. "Hey, I don't see 117B on the floor plan." The clerk didn't look up from the screen. "That's because it's a new edition. Didn't get the map updated yet." I nodded, but the tightness in my gut told me I shouldn't have accepted that explanation so easily. The hallway smelled of stale carpet and cheap air freshener, the kind that tries too hard to mask decades of neglect. I slid the card into the lock, and the door clicked open. Inside, it was exactly like every other room I'd passed on the way here. Beige walls, a wobbly nightstand, a flickering ceiling bulb struggling to stay lit. The window was too small to see much beyond the parking lot, where a lone, dusty pickup truck sat idling for no reason. I dropped my bag with a thud and tried the door. Locked. I turned the handle again, more forcefully this time. Locked. The key card still worked, but the knob wouldn't budge outward. I laughed nervously to myself. Okay, weird. Probably just a faulty lock. But when I tried to leave the room via the hallway, the corridor behind me twisted in ways that didn't make sense. I swear the walls shifted. I passed the same cracked tile again, the same peeling wallpaper with water stains that looked like old bruises. The numbers on the doors, 117B, 118B, 119B, were all wrong, too. None of them matched the floor plan, and none led anywhere familiar. I stopped, heart hammering, and tried to retrace my steps. Each hallway looped back to me, like a maze built to trap. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp plaster and a faint metallic tang that made my mouth go dry. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the rough texture of peeling paint, and swallowed hard. "This has to be a joke," I muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "Someone's screwing with me." I banged on the door of room 117B, hoping a guest might answer. Silence. No footsteps, no movement, no sign of life anywhere. The hotel was dead. Dead and endless. I paced the narrow hallway again, counting steps, trying to find a difference, any clue. The carpeting was threadbare, but the pattern was identical every few feet, like a repeating loop stitched into the floor. My fingers traced the frayed edge, and a sudden cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I sat down on the floor, back against the wall, and tried to slow my breathing. Was I losing it? The idea felt ridiculous. I wasn't drunk, hadn't taken anything. But the sensation was real enough, like the walls themselves were closing in. I remembered the clerk's blank expression, the way his eyes flicked away when I asked about the missing room. Something about him didn't add up. I'd seen him glance toward the back office just before I took the key. Maybe he knew. Maybe he wanted me stuck here. I forced myself to stand. If I was trapped, I needed to find a way out. Anyway, I started knocking on every door I passed, hoping anyone would answer. A faint rustling behind one door made me freeze. I waited, heart pounding, but it was just the wind slipping through the cracks. Hours passed. Or maybe only minutes. Time lost meaning. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows that shifted and stretched like living things on the walls. I couldn't tell if it was getting darker outside. The endless hallways swallowed any sense of direction. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, echoing just beyond the bend. I held my breath, every nerve screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. A figure appeared, a man, tall, his face obscured by shadows. He didn't say a word but gestured toward the door at the end of the hall. My skin prickled with unease, but I followed. The door was different. Heavy wood, solid, with a brass handle worn smooth by years of use. I hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He shrugged, voice low and calm. "Because if you stay, you'll never leave. And if you leave, it's not the way you think." The words didn't make sense, but the door felt real. I gripped the handle and pulled. It opened onto a narrow stairwell leading down. The air smelled fresher, cooler. I descended cautiously, the man close behind but silent. At the bottom, a small exit door stood ajar. Outside, the night was clear, the sky sprinkled with stars. I stepped through, gasping, almost collapsing on the cracked asphalt. The motel loomed behind me, dark and silent, its windows like dead eyes. I turned around. The man was gone. I didn't wait. I ran to the highway, the sound of distant engines and barking dogs filling my ears. I didn't look back until I reached the first gas station miles away. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a pale blue light on my shaking hands. I told the attendant everything. He nodded, eyes wide but skeptical. "That place? It's been shut down for years. Nobody stays there." I laughed bitterly. "I stayed there." He shrugged. "Maybe you just needed to get away." And maybe I did. But the memory of those endless hallways, the cold walls, the silence that screamed, it stayed with me, long after the night had passed. I haven't driven that stretch of highway since. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear footsteps outside my window. Just for a moment. I don't look. Because some places aren't meant to be found. And some doors, once opened, never truly close. Story 2, Vanishing Guests, Motel's Haunting Secret. I never thought a night shift could feel so ordinary and yet so wrong at the same time. Late September nights in this part of the country can get surprisingly cold, but the cold inside the motel had nothing to do with the weather. It was the kind of cold that seeps in through chipped plaster and broken window seals, but it also settled on you when something isn't quite right. I rubbed my hands together, the rough calluses on my palms scraping against the worn wood of the counter. The smell of old coffee lingered in the air, strong and bitter, a reminder of the night's first pot I'd brewed around 11 p.m. I had worked the graveyard shift for almost a month now. It was supposed to be easy money, quiet nights punctuated by the occasional traveler or trucker. At least, that's what the manager, a man named Will, promised me during the interview. In reality, the motel was a tired relic, the kind of place where the walls hold more secrets than the guests. The faded carpet was stained in places I didn't want to think about, and the air conditioning clattered like it was on its last legs. But the pay was decent, and it kept me off the streets. That night, I was halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee when the first odd thing happened. A man walked in just past midnight, wearing a threadbare coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He moved slowly, like someone trying not to be noticed. I glanced up from the register, expecting the usual room for the night routine, but when I looked back, he was already gone. No footsteps on the cracked tile, no bell ding, no sound at all. The door had closed behind him with that familiar creak, but it felt off. I shook my head and muttered to myself, must have been my imagination. I checked the guest log. Nothing new. No record of a check-in since the last trucker 2 hours earlier. I tapped the screen of the motel's ancient computer, scrolling through the reservation system. Empty. No walk-ins, no calls, nothing. I leaned back in the squeaky chair, the leather cracked and peeling, and stared at the flickering lights outside the window. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a rusted sedan that looked like it had been there longer than I had. That's when I noticed the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay numbers. On the far side of the building, rooms 8 through 12 were dark. Permanently dark, it seemed. No lights flicking on and off, no shadows moving behind the curtains. I'd never seen those rooms occupied, but a few weeks ago, I heard faint music coming from room 10, something like an old blues record playing softly. I thought maybe it was a guest, but when I checked, no one was inside. The door was locked, no sign of recent entry. I shrugged it off. The place was old, after all. Maybe a loose speaker somewhere or a neighbor's radio drifting in. Still, a knot tightened in my stomach. I tried to focus on the mundane, checking the time, sipping more coffee, jotting down a maintenance request about the flickering lobby light. Around 2 a.m., the lobby phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. I answered immediately, expecting the usual requests for directions or complaints about noisy neighbors. Instead, a woman's voice whispered, barely audible, "Are you there?" The line went dead before I could respond. I frowned, pressing the receiver to my ear, but there was only static. I glanced at the CCTV monitor behind me, the grainy black and white images flickering across the screen. The camera feed showed the lobby, the parking lot, the hallway outside rooms 8 to 12. Nothing moved. No one was there. No cars pulling up. No shadowy figures lurking. I tapped the camera controls, cycling through the different angles. Nothing. But then I noticed something strange on the feed from the hallway outside room 9. A figure appeared. A man, standing perfectly still, staring straight into the camera. I blinked and zoomed in, but the image was so grainy I couldn't make out his face. When I looked back up at the lobby, the hallway was empty. I rubbed my eyes. Maybe I was tired. I must have been. The night shift does things to you. I tried calling Mo on his cell, but no answer. I sent a text, something casual about the broken light in the lobby, but he never replied. By 3 a.m., the motel was dead quiet. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the building settling. I started my rounds, walking through the dimly lit hallways, past the vacant rooms. I checked room 10 again. The door was locked, just as before. I knocked lightly, half expecting a response. Nothing. The silence stretched between the walls, pressing in on me. I felt eyes on my back, but when I turned, no one was there. The old carpet muffled my footsteps, but I was sure I heard something else, soft breathing, perhaps. Or just the wind slipping through a broken vent. Back in the lobby, I tried to shake off the unease. The night was almost over. I counted down the hours on the clock, telling myself this was just a slow night, nothing more. Then, just as dawn began to tint the sky a pale pink, a woman walked through the front door. She wore a long coat, her hair pulled tight in a bun, and carried a small suitcase. I smiled, relieved at the sight of a real guest. "Room for the night?" I asked, stepping forward. She nodded, her eyes scanning the lobby like she was searching for something or someone. "I don't see your name in the system," I said, tapping the keyboard. She shrugged. "Just passing through." I frowned but shrugged it off. "No problem. Room 4 is available." She handed me a crumpled bill, and I gave her the key. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Did you see the others?" she asked quietly. I blinked, caught off guard. "Others? What others?" Her eyes darkened. "The guests you don't see. The ones nobody talks about." Before I could reply, she was gone down the hallway, suitcase wheels clicking softly on the linoleum. I stood there, the words hanging in the air, colder than the night ever had. The motel felt different now, less like a place to pass through and more like a cage. I didn't know it then, but that question would haunt every night after. Who were the guests nobody saw? And why did the staff pretend they didn't exist? The lobby was empty, the only sound the low hum of the ancient AC unit struggling to keep the stale air moving. I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling the rough fabric of my shirt against my clammy skin. Why would the staff ignore some guests? And how did someone even slip past the cameras and the booking system? The whole thing felt wrong, like a puzzle where the pieces were deliberately missing. I glanced toward the hallway where she had disappeared. The flickering fluorescent light overhead cast jittery shadows on the cracked linoleum floor, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic, like old pennies left too long in a damp pocket. It made the place feel alive in the wrong way, like it was watching me. I sat down again, fingers tapping the keys. I pulled up the guest logs from the last week, scrolling through names and check-in times. Nothing unusual jumped out, no empty rooms, no discrepancies. But then I remembered the room numbers she'd mentioned, the ones she'd implied held the invisible guests. I cross-referenced those numbers with the logs. No entries. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. "This can't be right," I muttered. My voice sounded oddly loud in the quiet lobby. I knew I should call the manager or someone else on staff, but I wasn't sure if I could trust them. Besides, if they were ignoring people, maybe they were hiding something. The night stretched on. I decided to walk the motel grounds, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air outside was colder than inside, sharp against my skin. The gravel crunched under my boots as I passed the dimly lit parking lot. A distant dog barked, sharp, impatient, then silence. Complete silence. I stopped near room 7, a door that had been left slightly ajar. A cold draft spilled out, carrying a faint scent of cigarettes and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten. I swallowed hard and pushed the door open with a creak. Inside, the room was empty except for a stained mattress and a cracked mirror hanging crooked on the wall. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I scanned the room carefully. No sign of recent occupancy. No luggage, no discarded clothes. But then I noticed something high on the dresser, a small, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. They watch but never see. Don't trust the eyes that blink. My hands trembled, but I stuffed the note into my pocket. Who had written this? And why leave it here? Back at the front desk, I tried to shake off the unease as the night crawled forward. The usual late-night trickle of guests came and went. Most were quiet, some tired, others too drunk to care much about anything besides their own rooms. But each time I glanced at the security monitors, my stomach tightened. A few cameras showed static, flickering as if they were malfunctioning, yet the wiring seemed intact. I pulled up the footage from earlier in the night, rewinding to the time when the woman had checked in. The hallway outside room 4 was empty, no suitcase wheels clicking, no faint footsteps. Just the dim glow of the exit sign humming in the background. I leaned closer, rubbing my eyes. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I was tired. But then, a shadow flickered across the frame, quick, too quick to be a trick of the light. Something moved, but it wasn't on the logs. Not on any system. My phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. I jumped, nearly knocking over a stack of pamphlets. It was a text from Jamie, the day shift clerk I'd talked to once or twice. "You working tonight? Weird stuff happening. Call me when you can." I stared at the message, the hairs on my neck prickling. Jamie wasn't one for dramatics. If she was spooked, something was definitely off. I dialed her number, heart thudding hard against my ribs. Her voice came through, low and hurried. "Hey, yeah, I heard you talking to that woman last night. About the guests nobody sees?" She paused. "You're not imagining things." "What do you mean?" I asked, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. "There's stuff. Guests who check in, but they don't show up in the system. No record. No cameras catch them. The night staff acts like they're not there." I thought I was losing it, but I'm not. I ran a hand through my hair. Why would anyone do that? Ignore people like they're ghosts? Jamie hesitated. "Some of the night staff are. Well, let's just say they have reasons. People come here for things they don't want others to see. Deals. Meetings. Sometimes it's just easier to pretend certain guests don't exist." "That sounds like a recipe for disaster," I said, voice low. "Have you ever tried to find out more?" "Not yet. But I'm thinking of it." There was a pause, and then Jamie added, "Be careful. Not everyone here wants the truth." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at the phone, the silence in the motel suddenly feeling heavier, more oppressive. The crackling of the lobby's ancient radio filled the space, playing a soft, melancholy song. I looked around, the weight of those unspoken secrets pressing down on me. I didn't know who to trust anymore, not the staff, not the guests, not even my own eyes. And yet, I was caught in the middle of it. A night shift clerk in a motel full of invisible people, half-truths, and shadows that refused to stay in their place. I checked the clock. 2:30 a.m. The witching hour of this rundown place. My hands still shook as I prepared to make my next move. Because whatever this was, it wasn't going away. Not tonight. Not ever. The question was, would I survive long enough to find out why? The line had gone dead, but the silence that filled the room was louder than any hiss or static. I stared at my phone, the glow of the screen pale against the flickering overhead bulb. The lobby felt suffocating, like the shadows were pressing in closer, waiting. My fingers trembled, but I forced myself to stand and pace, the worn carpet underfoot rough against the thin soles of my shoes. The radio crooned on, soft, mournful, like a ghost trying to sing itself away. 2:30 a.m. I checked the clock again. Time crawled, dragging the night out longer than I wanted. Every creak of the old building seemed sharper now, every distant bark or rustle more urgent. Jamie's warning echoed in my head, not everyone here wants the truth. I knew that, but I needed to know anyway. The first thing I did was pull the motel's guest ledger off the front desk, an ancient, leather-bound book filled with yellowing pages and faded ink. I flipped through it, glancing at names and dates, trying to find any mention of those guests, the ones the staff ignored like they evaporated into thin air. Nothing. No mysterious arrivals, no unexplained stays. It was as if they slipped in and out with no trace, no record, no official acknowledgement. And yet I'd seen them, heard their voices, felt their presence. It was maddening. I shoved the ledger aside and grabbed the motel surveillance monitor. The screens blinked to life, showing grainy black and white footage of the parking lot, the hallway outside the rooms, the lobby. I scanned each feed, eyes darting for anything unusual. The lobby camera showed me standing there, but no one else. No guests wandering the halls. No shadows slipping past. Just empty corridors and the dull hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchenette. Crossing over to the hallway feed, I waited, breath held. A figure entered the frame, a man, older, wearing a rumpled suit. He moved slowly, head down, hands in pockets. I recognized him. The man from room 7, the one I'd watched disappear behind the cracked door the night before. But when I flipped through the guest ledger again, room 7 was listed as vacant. The man vanished from the camera's view. I waited, heart thudding, but he never reappeared. Like he'd never been there at all. I shut off the monitor and leaned back against the counter, the chill of the air conditioning making my skin prickle. This wasn't just about ghosts or stories anymore. Something was deliberately being erased, hidden in plain sight. I needed answers. But where? The phone buzzed again. My heart jumped. I snatched it up. Caller ID was blocked. "Hello?" I said, voice steadier than I felt. Silence. Then a whisper, almost too low to catch. "Stop digging." The line clicked dead. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just paranoia or a prank. Someone was watching me. Someone who wanted me to quit. I sat down, trying to think. Jamie had warned me. I should have listened. But I was too far in now. Too curious. Too desperate to understand. The night stretched on, slow and heavy. I watched the empty halls, every sound amplified, the distant thud of a door closing, the soft scrape of a chair somewhere far off. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and old cigarette smoke, the kind that clings to fabric and never quite leaves. It reminded me of my grandfather's house, the only place I ever felt safe as a kid. That comfort felt miles away now. At 3 a.m., the back door creaked open. I looked up sharply, heart banging. No one should be coming in at this hour. I grabbed the flashlight from under the desk and slipped into the hallway, the beam cutting through the darkness. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They stopped at the end of the hall, right outside room 11. I swallowed hard and edged forward, every nerve alive with tension. The door was cracked open a sliver, and I could see a pair of shoes, scuffed, worn. Sounds impossible, but it happened. "Hello?" My voice was small, uncertain. No answer. I pushed the door gently. Inside, the room was empty except for a chair facing the window and a small radio playing static. The air was stale, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in days. But then I noticed it, a worn leather wallet on the floor beside the chair. I picked it up. Inside was an ID card, faded and bent but still legible. Name, Jamie Keller. My pulse quickened. Jamie. The same person who had warned me earlier. The one who'd called me. Why was their wallet here? Why hadn't they told me they were here, or that they'd left? Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a bang. I spun around, flashlight beam swinging wildly, heart pounding so loud I was sure it would burst from my chest. The lock clicked. I was trapped. Breathing hard, I tried the handle. Locked tight. "Jamie?" I called out, voice cracking. "Are you here?" No reply. Only the radio static filled the room. I sank to the floor, back against the cold wall, the wallet clutched in my hand. The motel had stopped feeling like a place I could escape from. It was a trap, a labyrinth of secrets and lies. And now I was part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. Outside, the flickering hallway light gave out, plunging the corridor into darkness. Silence. Complete silence. The question was no longer if I would find the truth. It was whether I would ever get out to tell anyone. The door stayed locked. Outside, the hallway lingered in darkness, the emergency light flickering and cutting out again, leaving the corridor in pitch black. I couldn't tell how long I sat there, back pressed hard against the wall, the cold rough plaster biting through my shirt. My breath came in shallow bursts, uneven and ragged, and I kept telling myself to stay calm, to think. But calm was a lie. The truth was, I was unraveling. A soft shuffle echoed from somewhere beyond the door, a footstep, light and hesitant. I froze, my pulse dragging my senses taut. "Jamie?" I whispered, voice cracking like dry wood. No answer. Another step, then silence again. The kind of silence that feels as loud as a scream. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for anything, breathing, movement, a whisper. The radio on the desk buzzed with static, the only sound filling the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay. My fingers trembled, but I tucked the wallet into my jacket pocket, not ready to lose the proof of Jamie's presence. The lock clicked again. Not the door, but the lock on the small maintenance cabinet to my left. It was old, rusted, and somehow it gave me a spark of hope. I moved cautiously, the floor creaking beneath me like the motel itself was holding its breath. Inside the cabinet, I found a flashlight and a handful of batteries. The flashlight was bulky, scratched, but it worked when I flicked the switch, casting a narrow, steady beam into the shadows. I scanned the room, the light jittering over peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. A faint smell of burnt coffee mixed with something metallic, maybe rust. I thought about Jamie's warning, their voice still ringing in my head from the phone call earlier. They'd sounded urgent, scared even. "Don't trust the staff," they'd said. But now, trapped and alone, I realized I had no one to trust. Suddenly, faint footsteps approached from the other side of the door. Not the hesitant shuffle from before, but deliberate, heavy, slow. My skin prickled. Whoever was out there wasn't just wandering, they were looking for me. I clutched the flashlight tighter, its beam shaking. "Jamie?" I called again, louder this time. "If you're out there, please." No response. The footsteps stopped. Silence. My breathing filled the room again, the tension knotted tight inside my chest. Then, a low voice whispered through the door crack. "You shouldn't be here." The words were soft but carried an edge that sliced through the quiet. I pressed my ear harder against the door, but couldn't make out more. My mind raced. Who was out there? And how much did they know? I forced myself to stand, the floor cold beneath my bare feet. The wallet in my pocket felt like a lifeline, a key to something I didn't fully understand yet. Jamie's name was the only thread I had left. The hallway light outside sputtered and died again. Darkness swallowed the corridor whole. I edged toward the door, the flashlight cutting a path through the black. A faint breeze slipped under the threshold, carrying whispers of stale smoke and something else, fear, maybe. Or warning. I tried the handle one more time. Locked tight. Panic threatened to rise, but I pushed it down. I had to think. If the door wouldn't open, maybe another way out existed. I scanned the room again, flashlight beam resting on a small window near the ceiling, too high to reach, but maybe if I found a chair or something to climb on. Before I could move, the door handle rattled violently. My heart slammed against my ribs. The lock clicked once more, then silence. I held my breath, waiting. The handle stopped moving. No footsteps, no voices. Nothing. I sank back to the floor, the rough plaster scraping my skin. My mind spun in circles. Jamie was here. The wallet proved it. But the staff, they acted like the guests didn't exist. No records. No cameras. Now, I was locked in a room with someone out there who didn't want me to leave. I needed a plan. I looked around the room, eyes landing on the old phone on the desk. The receiver was off the hook. I grabbed it, pressing it to my ear. A dial tone. Then, static. Then a voice, a garbled whisper, impossible to make out. My hands shook. I slammed the receiver down. What use was a phone line that only gave static and murmurs? A sudden noise from the hallway made me jump, a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward the door. Closer now. I scrambled to the cabinet, pulling out an old broom. It was brittle and cracked, but better than nothing. I gripped it like a lifeline. The door rattled again, harder this time, as if whoever was there was trying to break in. Jamie, I whispered, voice barely audible. If you're out there, please, help me. No answer. The handle began to turn. I braced myself, heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would burst. The door creaked open a crack. A pale hand slipped through, followed by a face pale, gaunt, eyes sunken and haunted. Why are you here? The figure asked, voice a hollow rasp. I froze, broom raised. We don't want you here, they said, stepping inside. The room felt smaller, air heavier. Jamie? I said, searching the face. They shook their heads slowly. You don't belong here. None of you do. The door slammed shut behind them, locking again with a heavy click. Silence. Complete silence. I gripped the broom tighter, realizing the motel wasn't just ignoring certain guests, it was trapping them. And now, I was part of the nightmare. The question wasn't if I would get out. It was when. And whether I could survive long enough to tell anyone. The door hadn't budged again after it slammed shut behind that pale figure. I wasn't sure how long I stayed there, hoping the door would unlock itself or that Jamie, or whoever that was, would come back with answers. But nothing happened. The lock clicked only when I tried it, cold and unyielding. I was trapped. Not just in the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, but in a situation I didn't understand, tangled in something darker than the rundown walls and flickering neon signs outside. When I finally found the nerve to take a step back, my knees felt wobbly, unsteady. The broom dropped with a soft thud against the threadbare carpet. I pressed my ear against the door, straining for any sound, some clue. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just the slow, steady hum of the old air conditioner sputtering in the corner. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I ran them over the scratchy blanket. The room smelled of damp fabric and cheap cleaning spray and antiseptic mask trying to hide decay. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat a reminder I hadn't had a drink in hours. Why are you here? The hollow rasp repeated in my mind, echoing the figure's question. I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not yet. Later, though I couldn't say exactly when, I heard footsteps in the hall. Faint, hesitant. My pulse quickened. I pressed my face against the peephole, heart racing so fast it felt like it might break ribs. The hallway was empty. No sign of Jamie, no staff, no other guests. I realized then the truth I'd been avoiding. The motel itself was the threat. Not ghosts or monsters, but people. Or maybe the absence of people. The way the staff ignored certain guests wasn't a glitch. It was a strategy. A deliberate erasure. I thought back to the front desk, the faces I'd seen. The records that never existed. The cameras that never caught the unlisted guests. It wasn't a question of supernatural forces, but of control, denial. The motel was a cage, and some of its occupants were prisoners locked away by indifference and silence. When the door finally unlocked, it was because Jamie was back. Or at least, someone who looked like Jamie. The relief that surged through me was almost overwhelming. But the hollow eyes, the haunted expression, they hadn't changed. The figure stepped aside wordlessly. I followed them into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Outside the room, the motel was eerily quiet. Too quiet, even for the dead hours of the night. The front desk was empty. The usual hum of the vending machine was gone, replaced by a low buzzing noise that set my nerves on edge. Jamie, if that was truly their name, led me to the office. They moved slowly, as if the weight of the place pressed down on every step. Once inside, they gestured toward the empty files and blank screens. No records, they said simply. Why? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. They shook their head. Because they don't want you to know. I could taste the bitterness in my mouth, the metallic tang of fear mixed with anger. This wasn't just a rundown motel. It was a trap, a place where some people vanished from reality, erased by the very system meant to protect them. I sat at the desk, running my fingers over the cold surface. The silence pressed in again, but this time it felt different. Heavy with secrets, thick with unanswered questions. Jamie, if that was their name, stood beside me. You have to leave, they said. Before it's too late. I wanted to argue, to demand explanations, but the exhaustion hit me all at once. My legs ached, and my mind spun with the weight of everything I'd uncovered. I nodded instead. The walk back to the lobby was slow, each step echoing in the empty corridors. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, unnatural shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every flicker. Outside, the first hints of dawn bled into the sky, pale and uncertain. When I finally stepped onto the cracked pavement, the cool morning air hit me like a splash of water. The motel loomed behind me, silent, indifferent, a fortress of secrets and silence. I didn't look back. The days that followed were a blur of restless sleep and haunted thoughts. I reported what I could, though the police were skeptical. Without records, without proof, my story sounded like a ghost tale or a hallucination born of exhaustion and stress. I understood their doubt. I doubted myself, too. But I knew the truth. The motel had swallowed people whole, hiding them in plain sight, dismissed by the very system that was supposed to keep them safe. And I'd been caught in its web. I didn't go back. I found another job, one with steady hours and visible faces. Still, the memory clung to me, the hollow eyes, the locked door, the silence that screamed louder than any shout. Sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and the shadows feel too close, I wonder about those people. The ones who never existed on paper, the ones erased by neglect and fear. I wonder if Jamie, if that's even their name, is still there, trapped behind a door that won't open. And I wonder if anyone will ever hear their voice. The motel taught me something I hadn't expected. that the most terrifying monsters aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes, they're the ones who choose to look away. Story 3, Endless Route, Trapped in Time Loops. I never expected a bus ride to feel like a slow unraveling. The ticket was a last-minute decision, booked more out of stubbornness than planning. I needed to get from Chicago to Denver, no flights, no trains, just a Greyhound that left at noon from the cramped terminal downtown. My backpack was too heavy, the seat too narrow, and the air inside the bus already tinged with the faint smell of stale coffee and something metallic, like old pennies left in a forgotten drawer. The engine rumbled beneath me, steady but dull, like a heartbeat I wasn't sure I wanted to follow. I sat by the window, watching the city blur into highways edged with cracked asphalt and scraggly weeds. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, almost too clean, as if someone had scrubbed the clouds away. There was a faint hum of chatter behind me, low voices blending with the mechanical drone. At first, the passengers seemed like any other group of strangers thrown together by circumstance: an elderly woman knitting something blue, a man with a worn baseball cap reading a paperback, a teenage girl scrolling through her phone with a look of mild boredom. But then I noticed something odd. It was subtle, the kind of detail you don't catch until it's too late. The woman's knitting needles clacked steadily, but the pattern she worked on never changed. Every few rows, the same stitch repeated as if stuck on a loop. I blinked, thinking maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. The man with the cap, he flipped the same page over and over, as if the book had no other words beyond the ones he kept reading. The girl's fingers moved without purpose, scrolling endlessly through a photo album that never grew any larger. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just tired, maybe a touch delirious from weeks of too much work and too little sleep. Yet, the more I looked, the more these little loops appeared, like glitches in a worn-out film reel. The bus jolted slightly as it merged onto the highway. Outside, the landscape should have changed, but it didn't. The landmarks, the rusted water tower, the billboard with peeling paint advertising a diner called Martha's Place, the cluster of identical gas stations remained the same for what felt like an hour. I checked my phone for the map, but the signal had died somewhere outside the city limits. No bars. Nothing. How far are we from Lincoln? I asked the driver during a brief stop, voice louder than I intended. He glanced back through the rearview mirror, his eyes shadowed but steady. Couple hours yet. You got a long way to go. I nodded and sank back into my seat, but the feeling of wrongness lingered, like a faint electrical buzz under my skin. The bus pulled into a rest stop, an old-fashioned place with cracked concrete and a vending machine that rattled noisily when someone bought a soda. I stepped out, the air cool and dry against my face. The smell of gasoline mingled with the faint aroma of fried food from a nearby cafe. It was ordinary enough, but the people there didn't feel right either. A man with a gray mustache stood smoking just beyond the picnic tables, but his eyes didn't follow the smoke curling from his lips. Instead, they stared blankly at nothing. A mother called to a child, but the child never answered. Their voices were muted, as if spoken underwater. I rubbed my arms. The sun felt sharp, almost artificial in its brightness. Back on the bus, I tried to engage with the other passengers. Have you been to Lincoln before? I asked the girl with the phone. She looked up, but her eyes seemed distant. Sure, she said softly. It's nice. I pressed, what's the main street like? She shrugged. You know. Stores. People. Cars. That was it. No detail. No warmth. Just a rehearsed sentence. I felt a sudden weight in my chest, a tightness that made swallowing difficult. The man with the book shifted beside me. You knew around here? His voice was low, almost too quiet. Passing through, I replied. Why? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll see things. Things that don't make sense. I frowned. What do you mean? He shook his head and turned away, muttering something I couldn't catch. The bus rolled forward, the engine's drone growing louder again. I leaned against the window, tracing the blurry shapes of trees and fields. Trying to pinpoint exactly what felt off was like trying to catch a shadow. It slipped away just as I reached for it. Then, the first real anomaly hit me. The road signs. They were wrong. Not just slightly, but completely. The highway number changed inexplicably from 80 to 58 and back again. Town names I didn't recognize appeared and disappeared on the same signposts: Mapleview, Crestwood, Helmsbury. I checked an old paper map I'd stuffed into my backpack, the one I always carried as a habit, and none of these places existed. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Maybe I'd been on the wrong bus all along, or maybe I'd nodded off and dreamed the whole trip. But the bus driver's face, the cramped seats, the stale bus smell, all real. I looked around. The passengers were still there, but they seemed less like people now and more like actors in some uneasy play. Their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Their conversations, when they happened, felt rehearsed. I wanted to speak up, to ask questions, but the words felt trapped behind a glass wall. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. The fabric was rough, slightly damp with sweat. The bus windows steamed from the heat inside, blurring the world outside into an indistinct watercolor of shapes and colors. I closed my eyes for a moment, willing the feeling to pass. When I opened them, the bus had stopped again. We were at a place that shouldn't exist. A small town square with a fountain that didn't run, surrounded by buildings of identical brickwork, their windows dark and empty. The street was silent except for the distant ticking of a clock tower that looked too new, too clean, to belong anywhere. The bus driver stood outside, leaning against the door, smoking a cigarette. No one else moved. I felt my hands tremble, fingers curling into fists against the seat. Why are we stopping here? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. The driver looked at me, his face unreadable. This is the part where you decide what to believe. I blinked. The street signs outside changed again, the names shifting like words in a Scrabble game. I swallowed hard, the taste of metal sharp on my tongue. And then, the bus door closed. The engine started. We rolled forward. Into the unknown. The bus rumbled back to life, the engine's growl filling the hollow silence of that impossible town square. The air inside the bus smelled stale, a mix of old upholstery and the faint tang of something I couldn't place, like the sharp scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. I rubbed my hands over the worn fabric of the seat, feeling the rough texture grind against my skin as if to remind me this was real, not some half-formed nightmare. But what did real even mean anymore? I glanced around at the other passengers. They all sat in silence, their faces unreadable, eyes fixed ahead or buried in their laps. Only a few had noticed the strange stop, but no one said a word. A woman near the front, her hair pulled back tightly, glanced sideways at me, her expression flickering with something like suspicion or maybe fear. Then she quickly looked away, pretending to check her phone. Something was wrong with them. I could feel it in the way their bodies tensed, the slight twitch in their cheeks when they thought I wasn't looking. Like they were all part of some unspoken agreement to keep quiet, to pretend nothing had changed. But I wasn't going to let it go. I leaned toward the man in the seat beside me, an older guy with a salt and pepper beard who'd been asleep when we stopped. Did you notice the square back there? The fountain that wasn't running? The clock tower that looked brand new? My voice was low, tearful. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and shook his head. I don't remember. Maybe I was dozing. But I caught it, his hesitation. His eyes flicked to the window, then back to me, as if trying to decide how much to say. Look, he whispered finally, you're not the only one who's been seeing things that don't add up. But it's better not to say it out loud. I swallowed hard. Better? Why? He glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. Because if they find out you're paying attention, things get complicated. Complicated. That word settled in my chest like a stone. The bus hit a patch of uneven pavement, jolting me forward. I gripped the armrest, my knuckles white. Outside, the landscape was changing again. The neat rows of identical brick buildings faded into a stretch of empty road bordered by dense woods, too dense, too dark to be natural. The trees pressed close, their branches swaying as if whispering secrets I couldn't hear. I turned back to the window, but the reflection was blurry. My own face stared back at me, pale and drawn, eyes wide. I needed to understand what was happening. I had to start piecing together whatever twisted puzzle I'd been dropped into. The bus driver's words echoed, "This is the part where you decide what to believe." But belief was a luxury I couldn't afford. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the crumpled state map I'd been using to track our progress. My finger traced the route we should have been on, straight across the country, through towns I recognized from childhood road trips, familiar landmarks, and highways mapped in detail. But outside the window, the road signs no longer matched any of that. One moment, a sign read Millstone Ridge, the next it switched to Harrow Creek, then Millstone Ridge again, each name flickering like a broken neon sign. I tried to snap a photo with my phone, but the screen froze with a soft buzz, then went black. The battery was full 5 minutes ago. I tapped and swiped uselessly, the screen unresponsive. Frustration bubbled up, hot and sharp. I shoved the map back into my bag, breathing unevenly. There was no way this was normal. I wasn't losing my mind. Something else was at work. The woman with tight hair shifted her gaze back toward me. This time, she spoke, voice a whisper, "You're not the only one who's noticed. But you have to be careful. They watch. They always watch." "Who watches?" I asked, leaning closer. She glanced around again, eyes wide and darting. "People who want to see how far they can push us. How much we can take before we break." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The bus felt colder all of a sudden, the hum of the engine a low drone that filled the space between us. I looked at the other passengers again. The man with the beard was now staring at the floor, fingers tapping in nervous rhythm against his knee. Another woman, younger, with a scar above her eyebrow, was staring straight ahead, expression blank but eyes flickering with something fierce, determination. Fear? I needed allies. At least someone to share this nightmare with. But who could I trust? I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and nodded at the woman. "Tell me everything you know." She hesitated, then whispered, "It's not just random. This," she gestured vaguely outside the window, "this whole trip is a test. A study. A game with no rules. They change the scenery, the people, even the time. Some of us have been on this bus longer than you can imagine. Days, weeks, maybe more. Why?" I pressed. "To see how we react. How long we hold onto reality before we start to believe the illusion." A laugh escaped me, bitter and dry. "That sounds insane. Maybe it is. But it's real. And once you're in, there's no getting off." I looked back out the window. The woods were now replaced by a field of tall grass, swaying under a sky that didn't match the one from minutes ago, a dull orange haze, like late afternoon trapped in a perpetual state of twilight. The bus slowed as we approached a small cluster of buildings. I recognized none of them. No signs, no visible names, just empty storefronts with peeling paint and cracked windows. One stood out, a diner with a flickering neon sign that read open but with the letters out of order. Pino. Inside, a thin man with a nervous smile wiped down the counter. His eyes met mine briefly, then darted away like he was expecting trouble. I turned to the woman again. Have you been here before? She nodded. Yes. This place shows up over and over. Like a glitch in the system. The man with the beard shifted uncomfortably. I've tried to get off the bus when we stop. Once. But the driver, he always finds a way to bring us back. Who is he? I asked. No one knows. Nobody talks to him. He's just there. Part of the test. The weight of it pressed down on me. I wanted to scream, to pound on the windows, to make anyone explain why I was trapped in this loop of shifting realities. But the bus driver remained silent, cigarette smoke curling around him like a shadow. Suddenly, the dim light that cast long, dancing shadows inside the bus flickered, plunging us into darkness for a breathless second before the overhead lamps buzzed back on. A collective shiver rippled through the passengers. I glanced around. The woman with the scar was gone. I blinked, confused. Had she moved? Slipped away? I scanned every face, but she wasn't there. Where did she go? I asked, voice tight. The man beside me shook his head slowly. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes they don't. A cold sweat broke out across my back. The bus lurched forward without warning, the sudden movement sending a jolt through my chest and stomach. Outside, the landscape blurred and shifted again. The clock tower from the square reappeared, its hands spinning wildly backward. I gripped the armrest, knuckles pale. The driver's cryptic words echoed in my mind, "This is the part where you decide what to believe." But I wasn't sure I believed anything anymore. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, like I was standing on a fault line that could crack open any second. The bus plunged deeper into the unknown. I had to. The flicker of the overhead lights died out again, this time for longer, 3, maybe 4 seconds, before buzzing back to life with that same sterile hum. The bus driver's face was half swallowed by shadows, smoke curling around him like a veil. The whole bus seemed to hold its breath. I gripped the edge of my seat, knuckles white, heart thudding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. I glanced at the man with the beard. He looked drained, like the last thread holding his composure was fraying fast. The woman, the one who said this place kept showing up over and over, was staring out the window, lips pressed tight, pale in the flickering light. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "What do you mean, part of the test?" I asked her. She blinked slowly, like she was weighing whether to answer. "It's not just some random trip. It's designed that way. To trap you." Her eyes flicked around nervously, like she expected something to overhear. "Trust me, I was there. The bus, the stops, the people. None of it's real. Or at least, none of it's what it seems. It's all constructed. A psychological experiment, or maybe an experiment on reality itself." She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. I wanted to shake her. "That sounds insane." She gave a bitter smile. "I know how that sounds, but it's true. I've been stuck here longer than I care to admit. You don't get off. You don't change routes. You just keep moving in circles. The bus jolted suddenly, throwing me forward. The driver's hand slipped briefly from the wheel, then steadied. I noticed his eyes, those pale, unreadable eyes, barely blinking. More than human? No. Just someone too practiced at this, too conditioned. A man who'd learned to erase himself. I looked out the window again. The landscape had changed again, but this time something was off. The sky was a dull, washed-out gray, and the trees looked like cardboard cutouts, flat and lifeless. The road stretched endlessly, but the signs were scrambled, letters in weird orders, like the Pino from the diner sign earlier. Nothing matched any map I'd ever seen. Nothing made sense. My stomach clenched. If this was an experiment, who was running it? What was the goal? And how deep did it go? The woman leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. They watch you. They test your reactions. You think you're discovering things on your own, but you're just part of the data. I wanted to argue, to deny it, but the cold sweat spreading down my back said otherwise. Every small inconsistency, the mismatched accents on the bus, the way the same faces kept appearing in different seats with different names, was a puzzle piece clicking into place. The man with the beard muttered, I tried to leave once. Walked off at a stop. But the driver pulled us back. The road curved, the bus reappeared. Like it was waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. Control? Confirmation? Maybe it's all about breaking us down until we stop trying. I chewed my lip, the taste of stale coffee and cigarette smoke thick in my mouth. I felt trapped, not just physically, but mentally. Like the walls of my mind were closing in, brick by brick, until all that was left was this endless loop. Then, the driver's voice came over the intercom. Calm. Mechanical. Next stop, Pine Ridge. The name sent a ripple through the bus. The woman's eyes widened. Pine Ridge? That's impossible. I frowned. Why? Because we passed it hours ago. It doesn't exist on this route. Not anymore. A chill ran down my spine as the bus slowed, pulling into a small, deserted station bathed in flickering yellow light. The platform was empty except for a single figure standing near the edge, a man in a dark coat, face obscured beneath a hood. He didn't move as we stopped. Didn't wave or signal. Just stood there, an island of stillness in the artificial night. Someone gasped behind me. The woman whispered, They're sending someone new. I turned to the man with the beard. Who? He looked away, voice tight. An observer. Or maybe a handler. Someone to make sure we don't get any ideas. The doors hissed open. The cold night air rushed in, sharp and real. It smelled of wet pavement and something metallic like old machinery left out in the rain. The man in the hood stepped aboard, eyes scanning the bus slowly. When they met mine, I felt a jolt, like recognition or a warning. He moved down the aisle, past the other passengers who sat frozen, faces blank. His footsteps were soft but deliberate, echoing in the sudden quiet. I wanted to say something, ask who he was, why he was here. But the words stuck in my throat. Then he stopped beside me, hand reaching out not to touch, but to slide something across the seat. A folder. Thick, heavy, covered in plain brown paper with no markings. His voice was low, dry. You need to read this. I hesitated, fingers trembling as I took the folder. The paper felt rough, almost coarse, like it had been handled too many times. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the front, disappearing into the shadows near the driver. The bus started moving again, the engine's growl filling the space. I opened the folder carefully, the pages crackling softly. Inside were documents, reports, graphs, notes. Names I didn't recognize, but some details hit too close to home. Psychological profiles. Behavioral patterns. Recordings of conversations I was sure I'd never had. On the last page, a single sentence was underlined in thick red ink. Subject has reached the point of no return. Escalate containment protocols. My chest tightened. I reread it. No return. No escape. I looked up, catching the woman's eyes. Night had fallen thick and heavy, swallowing the streets in a quiet so complete it pressed against my ears like a physical weight. She was watching me, expression unreadable but resolute. We're not just passengers, she said quietly. We're variables. And now, the experiment knows we're aware. The bus plunged into a long tunnel. The lights dimmed, the walls closing in like the pages of a book folding shut. I folded the folder back and tucked it under my arm. The road ahead wasn't just endless, it was designed to trap me forever. And now, there was no turning back. The bus hummed steadily beneath me. Outside, the night sprawled in endless black, a blank canvas where the streetlights flickered like faulty stars. I kept the folder on my lap, fingers brushing its rough paper as though it might burn. The words inside were still swimming, twisting my thoughts into knots that tightened with every breath. The woman across from me, her name was Agnes. I caught it somewhere between the stops, watched me with those unblinking eyes. They didn't look worried. Not exactly. More like she was waiting. Waiting for me to break or maybe to understand something I wasn't ready for. I swallowed hard, the stale bus air thick with the scent of worn leather seats and a faint trace of spilled coffee. Around us, the other passengers seemed smaller, less real, like cutouts in a diorama. Or actors in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I cleared my throat. What is this? The folder. The notes. The profiles. The sentence marked in red. Agnes leaned forward slightly. They've been watching you. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the drone of the engine like a shard of glass. I looked at her, searching for a hint of madness or kindness, maybe both. Instead, there was only that patient calm, the kind that made me want to look away. They're running tests, she said. On everyone here. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. But why? How? Who? The bus jolted over a pothole, and my hands trembled as I gripped the folder tighter. Outside, the landscape blurred, trees that looked wrong, buildings that didn't match any map I'd ever seen. The signs flashed by, but the names meant nothing. No towns I recognized. No highways that connected. They fabricate the reality, Agnes said, her voice steady now. Cycle after cycle. You think you're moving forward, but you're trapped. In layers of lies. I blinked. But I've been on this bus for days. I've passed through towns, talked to people. How can it all be fake? She gave a sad smile. You're starting to see the cracks. The folder slipped from my lap as my mind spun. I remembered the faces, some friendly, some cold, changing subtly. The way the driver never spoke, the way the route looped back on itself like a twisted ribbon. And that sentence, subject has reached the point of no return. Escalate containment protocols. I shivered. Containment. Like I was some kind of animal. Can I get off? The words felt desperate, childish even. Agnes shook her head. They won't let you. Not yet. Not until they're done. A cold weight settled in my chest. My hands were clammy now, the folder slick beneath my fingers. I forced myself to breathe, focusing on the faint hum of the engine, the distant murmur of voices, the creak of the suspension. The bus was a cage, and I was its prisoner. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A brief blackout plunged us into darkness. Murmurs rose, nervous and sharp. When the lights returned, Agnes was gone. Panic hit me like a wave. I scanned the seats empty. No sign of her. The passengers stared ahead, expressionless, as if nothing had changed. I stood, heart hammering in my ears. Where did she go? I muttered, voice cracking. No answer. Just a steady thrum of the bus moving forward. Or was it backward? I wasn't sure anymore. I pulled out the folder again, flipping to the last page. Under the red ink, a smaller note, almost hidden beneath the fold, subject shows increased awareness. Initiates psychological pressure. Pressure. The word echoed in my mind, twisting into a knot of dread. I shoved the folder into my bag, stuffing it away like a secret too dangerous to hold. The bus slowed. The driver's silhouette appeared in the rearview mirror, head bowed, face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. A voice crackled over the PA system. Not the driver's. Cold. Clinical. Next stop, Terminal 7. All passengers remained seated. Terminal 7. That name didn't exist on any map I'd seen. It sounded like a place designed to trap. I slid back into my seat, hands gripping the armrests. The bus idled, engine growling low, and then the door hissed open. A woman stepped aboard. Tall, with sharp features and eyes that didn't blink. She scanned the bus slowly, methodically, until her gaze landed on me. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Carter, she said. We need to talk. I didn't recognize the voice, but something inside me clenched. The air thickened, the faint smell of antiseptic mixing with the stale bus odors. My throat tightened. Who are you? I managed. She took a step closer, the floor creaking beneath her boots. An observer. A facilitator. You've been uncooperative. I wanted to ask what that meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stared at the folder in my bag, the truth I wasn't ready to face. Come with me, she said, voice firm but not unkind. It's time. The bus lurched forward, doors closing behind her with a hiss that sounded like a trap snapping shut. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The windows showed nothing but black, the road stretching into an impossible void. I stood, legs weak, and followed. The corridor outside the bus was narrow and cold, walls coated in peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital or a laboratory, too clean, too sharp. She led me through a maze of hallways, the silence broken only by our footsteps. I tried to memorize every detail, the chipped tiles, the faint hum of machinery behind closed doors, the distant murmur of voices that might have been real or just echoes. At last, we reached a door marked with a single word, observation. She opened it without hesitation. Inside, a small room bathed in harsh white light. A chair sat in the center, bolted to the floor. Sit, she ordered. I obeyed, the cold metal biting into my skin. Across from me, a bank of monitors flickered on, screens displaying faces I recognized, passengers, crew, even myself. Moments captured, conversations recorded, reactions catalogued. You're part of something bigger, she said, voice low. The bus rolled on, tires humming against asphalt that felt less like a road and more like a loop I couldn't escape. I stared out the grimy window, watching the landscape flicker between familiar and foreign. Trees that looked like oaks twisted into species I couldn't name, fields stretched into impossible shapes, and towns appeared only to vanish in the next blink. I rubbed my eyes. It was the same stretch, again and again. I realized this trip wasn't moving forward. It was a circle masquerading as a line. Inside, the passengers were changing too. Faces blurred and sharpened with each stop, names forgotten and replaced. I tried to talk to them before, but they only gave rehearsed answers, like actors sticking to a script they didn't understand. I wasn't mad anymore. Not exactly. I was tired. Tired of trying to make sense of a senseless puzzle. That morning, the bus had pulled into a rest stop that wasn't on any map. A dim cafe with flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air like a bad memory. I stepped inside, the linoleum floor sticky beneath my shoes, and the chatter of other patrons was strangely hollow, like echoes in a cavern. I found a corner table, my fingers tracing the rough surface. A waitress with a tight smile approached, her name tag read Linda. She asked what I wanted, and I ordered black coffee without thinking. The bitterness burned my tongue and grounded me. While I waited, I scanned the room. People sat in pairs and groups, but I felt an invisible barrier, like I was looking at them through a glass wall. They weren't quite real, not fully here. There was a man near the window, reading a newspaper, but the headlines were nonsense, words jumbled, dates that made no sense. I blinked. The paper folded itself neatly, and the man looked up, eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something unplaceable. Do you ever feel like you're not in control? I asked quietly, unable to stop myself. He paused, then smiled, a flash of something sharp underneath. Control is an illusion. You're just waking up. The phrase hit me like a slap. Waking up. I wanted to argue, but my throat was dry, and the room spun slightly. I shook my head and stepped outside, the stale air hitting me like a slap of reality. Nothing here was right. Back on the bus, I sat near the back, watching the driver's face in the rearview mirror. He was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a neutral expression that didn't quite reach his mouth. For the first time, I spoke to him. Where exactly are we going? He didn't answer immediately. The bus rumbled over a bump, and he adjusted the rearview mirror. You're asking the wrong question. I frowned. What do you mean? He glanced at me, then back at the road. It's not about where you're going. It's about where they want you to think you're going. The words landed heavy. Who? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the dashboard and handed me a folded slip of paper. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The text was typed, clinical, subject number 47, psychological observation in progress. Compliance level, moderate. Reality perception, distorted. I swallowed hard, the edges of the paper digging into my palms. This wasn't a bus trip. It was an experiment. A game where the rules weren't just unknown, they were constantly rewritten. I looked up, eyes searching his face for any sign of empathy or remorse. There was none. Just a mechanical calm that chilled me more than the cold wind slipping through the cracked window. Why me? I whispered. His answer was a shrug. You were chosen. Everyone here was. The rest of the trip passed in a blur of half memories and shifting faces. I learned not to trust what I saw or heard, to hold tightly to that slip of paper as the only proof of something real. But even that was fragile. When the bus finally stopped, it was at a terminal that looked like a cross between a hospital waiting room and a sterile office lobby. White walls, harsh lighting, the faint hum of fluorescent tubes overhead. The passengers filed off without a word. I lingered, heart pounding like a trapped bird. A woman approached, clipboard in hand, wearing a lab coat that was too crisp, too clean. Her smile was polite but distant. "Welcome, subject number 47. Your cycle is complete." I shook my head. "No. I'm done. I'm not part of this anymore." She tilted her head, expression unreadable. "You've made progress. That's why we're ending this phase. What happens now? Integration. We'll help you adjust back to reality. It won't be easy, but it's necessary." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded slowly. Maybe it was over. Maybe I could finally leave this loop behind. They led me through a corridor, the air sterile and still. My footsteps echoed, louder than they should be. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting the bus to reappear, to pull me back into its endless cycle. But it didn't. In the debriefing room, a single chair faced a window overlooking a city skyline that looked normal, familiar buildings, people walking dogs, street vendors shouting over the morning rush. The sun was warm on my skin, real and unyielding. They handed me a report, a summary of the experiment, the data collected. Reading it, I realized how deeply they probed my mind, how carefully they constructed this fabricated reality to test the boundaries of perception and control. The horror wasn't in ghosts or monsters, but in the cold, clinical manipulation of human experience. I thought about the other passengers, the ones who never made it out of the loop, their identities swallowed by the experiment's design. I thought about myself, what I'd lost, and what I'd gained. A fractured sense of self, yes, but also a fierce, stubborn clarity. When I left the building, the air smelled like rain in city streets, noisy and chaotic and utterly real. I breathed it in deep. Walking away from the terminal, I didn't look back. The sky was a clear blue, the sounds of life vibrant and alive. I felt the weight of the past, but it was no longer crushing me. It was a scar, a reminder that I'd survived. I didn't know what came next. Maybe normal life, maybe something else. But for the first time in a long while, I was free to choose. And that was enough. Story 4, Foresight on the Road, Deadly Crash Foretold. I never used to pick up hitchhikers. That's when I saw him. He stood just past the last exit, thumb out, a worn backpack slung low on one shoulder. His jacket was too light for the chill in the air, the kind of thin nylon that crackled when the wind caught it. I slowed, not because I was eager, but because something about him caught my eye, maybe the way his eyes didn't flinch when I looked at him. Usually, when I passed a hitchhiker, they'd glance away or shuffle their feet. This guy just stared straight at me, calm. I glanced at the rearview mirror, weighing the decision, and then pulled over. The gravel scraped under my tires as I stopped, the sound sharp in the quiet. "Need a ride?" I asked, voice rough from the day. He nodded once, voice low and steady. "Thanks. Just to the next town, if that's okay." I unlocked the door, and he slid in without fuss. The car smelled faintly of coffee and old leather, a mix I found oddly comforting. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose sign on the lamppost. The sky kept its heavy silence. We drove on in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the engine filling the space between us. He didn't offer a name, and I didn't ask. There was something about him, quiet, but not in a way that begged conversation. More like he was waiting for something. Then he spoke, breaking the stillness without warning. "There's a crash coming up in a few miles. Blue sedan loses control near the left curve." I blinked, glancing at him through the corner of my eye. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I've seen it. Happens every week. I almost laughed. How do you know that? Just pay attention, he said. His voice was calm, unshaken, like he was telling me the weather forecast. I squinted at the road ahead, the curve coming up fast. A few seconds later, I saw the brake lights of a blue car flicker, then the car jerked sideways, sliding briefly on the wet asphalt before regaining control. My hands tightened on the wheel. I swallowed hard. You were right, I said, voice barely above a whisper. The cold sweat prickled down my back. He shrugged, like it was no big deal. There's a police checkpoint up ahead, too. You'll want to take the next exit. I didn't want to believe it, but I took the exit. When I peeked back at the highway, the flashing lights of police cars were visible just past the curve. I glanced over, my pulse uneven. How do you know all this? Experience, he said, voice flat. Sometimes you see patterns. Patterns. The words settled in the pit of my stomach and wouldn't let go. We drove on, the sky darkening as the rain started, soft and insistent against the windshield. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to read something, an expression, a hint of a joke, a sign of a trick. But his face was still, almost unreadable. The kind of face that might be bored, or tired, or just waiting. I wanted to ask more, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I asked something smaller. You don't have a phone? Nothing to tell me who you are? He shook his head, the motion deliberate. No. Not for a while. We fell back into silence again, broken only by the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers and the muted thud of tires on wet pavement. A mile later, he spoke again. There's a construction zone coming up. They change the signs every day, but today it's a detour to the left lane. I glanced ahead, noting the orange cones and flashing signs. How do you keep all this straight? Habit, he said. I watch. The sky was growing darker now, and I realized the rain had thickened, blurring the edges of the road like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The scent of damp earth and exhaust mixed in the car, making the air heavy but oddly familiar. I tried to shake the uneasy feeling settling over me. There was something off about all this. The way he knew what was coming. The way I had followed his warnings without question. After a long pause, I said, Have you been out here long? Hitchhiking, I mean. He gave me a thin smile, almost a grimace. Long enough to learn the roads. And the people who travel them. That last word hung in the air. People. Not accidents, not chance. People. We passed a cluster of trees just as a dog barked somewhere in the distance, sharp and sudden. The sound startled me more than it should have. I looked at him. His eyes flicked briefly toward the window, then back to me. Ever feel like you're being watched? I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. He shrugged again, but this time there was a flicker behind his eyes. Sometimes, but not always by who you think. I swallowed. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a random hitchhiker telling me about traffic. There was something else, something beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite place. The rain slowed, leaving the road slick and shining under the streetlights. I was gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, the knuckles white. Why me? I finally asked. Why tell me all this? He looked at me then, directly, and for a moment I thought I saw something like regret. Because you listen. I wasn't sure if that was a warning or a promise. We drove on, the night swallowing us whole. And somewhere just ahead, I knew the road was waiting. The miles behind us disappeared under the steady hum of the tires on wet asphalt, the rain now just a faint patter on the roof. Ever feel like you're being watched? I asked, voice low, almost a whisper. The words caught in the space between us, thickening the air, cold and heavy with silence. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze shifted briefly toward the window, then back to me, eyes narrowing. Sometimes, but not always by who you think. There was that flicker again, something unreadable, like a warning wrapped in a confession. I swallowed hard, the grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles blanched white. Why me? I finally said. Why tell me all this? He looked at me then, directly, and for a moment I thought I saw something like regret. Because you listen. The rain had slowed, the road slick and shining under the pale streetlights. Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. We drove on, swallowed by the night. Somewhere just ahead, I knew the road was waiting. By the time I got home, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first tentative hints of dawn. I parked my car in the driveway, the engine's low hum fading into the steady chirp of morning birds. The hitchhiker said nothing as I turned off the ignition. I glanced over at him. His eyes were closed, lips slightly parted like he was still breathing in the night's tension. For a moment, I considered asking him to stay, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached over and opened the door quietly. He slipped out without a word, disappearing into the gray morning mist like a shadow melting away. I stood there, the cold air prickling my skin, the damp smell of rain mixing with the faint scent of gasoline and wet earth. The silence inside the house felt louder than the storm outside. I didn't sleep well that night. The hitchhiker's words kept echoing in my mind. I needed to know more. Not just about the accidents and the police checkpoints he predicted, but about him. Who was he really? How did he know? And most unsettling of all, why had he chosen me? The next morning, I pulled out my phone and began piecing things together. The local news websites had reports of 3 traffic accidents in the past week, all within a few miles of each other. The details matched the hitchhiker's warnings perfectly, down to the exact times and locations. And the police checkpoints? They were real too. I checked the local police scanner app. There had been multiple patrols and stops in the area over the last month, more than usual for this stretch of highway. I scribbled notes on a crumpled pad, the words blurring slightly as I tried to make sense of it all. The hitchhiker wasn't just guessing. He was tracking something, someone. And it wasn't just about avoiding danger, it was about controlling it. That thought unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I decided to visit the site of the most recent accident, a narrow curve just outside town. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and fading exhaust. I crouched near the guardrail, fingers brushing the rough metal, cold and slightly sticky from overnight rain. A crushed bumper lay discarded by the roadside, its once bright paint dulled by dirt and time. As I stood, the wind carried the faint sound of footsteps on gravel. I turned sharply. No one. Just a stray dog barking somewhere off in the distance, its call muffled by the trees. I shook off the feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was just the place, the way the shadows stretched and twisted with the morning light. I wasn't sure anymore what was real and what wasn't. Back home, I found myself reaching for my phone again, dialing the number I'd found scribbled on a scrap of paper in the hitchhiker's pocket when I'd searched it briefly during a moment of panic. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaky but trying to sound casual. Hey. It's me. Look, I need to talk. About everything. Call me back if you're out there. No response. Days passed. The hitchhiker didn't return my calls or texts. But then, strange things started happening. The police checkpoints became more frequent, almost as if they were anticipating something. I began noticing cars slowing down or veering off the road when I approached, drivers looking uneasy or hurried. The night I drove past the curve again, a figure stood just beyond the bend, silhouetted by the dim glow of a street lamp. For a split second, I thought it was him. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. My hands trembled. Not from fear exactly, but from a mounting realization that I was no longer just an observer. I was part of something bigger. Something dangerous. The following evening, I met with a friend, Jenna, someone I trusted who worked as a local reporter. Over coffee at a small, cluttered cafe, I told her everything, the hitchhiker, the predictions, the accidents. She listened quietly, eyes sharp and curious. "Sounds like you're caught in some kind of game," she said finally, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. "But whose game? And what do they want?" I shrugged, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I'm not sure anymore. And I'm starting to think I'm not just helping him." Jenna frowned. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. "I think he's orchestrating these events. Not just warning about them. And if that's true, maybe I'm on his list next." The cafe fell silent. The clinking of cups and the low murmur of other patrons seemed distant, muffled. Outside, the streetlights flickered as a sudden gust rattled the windows. Jenna leaned in closer. "You need proof. Something concrete. Otherwise, no one's going to believe this." I nodded, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Proof. That was what I had to find. Before it was too late. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the amber glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the scattered notes and maps. I traced the routes again, the patterns emerging like a sinister blueprint. Every accident, every checkpoint, every detour led to the same narrow stretch of road, the one where I'd seen the figure standing. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the image from my mind. But the silence in the house pressed in on me. My phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. "You're closer than you think." I dropped the phone onto the table, the screen's glare harsh in the dim light. My breath caught. The words weren't a warning. They were a promise. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows again. And somewhere, just ahead, the road was waiting. The phone lay on the table, its dull glow pulsing like a heartbeat in the dim kitchen light. I ran my fingers over the scattered notes and maps again, tracing the routes with a trembling hand. Every accident, every checkpoint, every detour was connected, like the spokes of a wheel all converging on that narrow stretch of road where I'd seen the figure standing. The figure, the hitchhiker, who'd warned me about the dangers ahead. At first, I thought he was some kind of guardian angel, but now the line between help and harm was blurring in a way I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "You made your choice." I swallowed hard. What choice? I hadn't made any. Or had I? The thought gnawed at me. Was I already in too deep? Was I helping him, this stranger who predicted every accident and checkpoint, or was I just a pawn in a game I didn't understand? The kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second dragging the silence taut. I needed to move. I grabbed my jacket and keys, the coarse fabric rough against my skin. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. The wind had dropped, but the world still felt off quiet except for the occasional distant bark of a dog and the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the sidewalk. I started walking, my feet crunching over gravel as I headed toward my car. The streetlights flickered unpredictably, throwing long, jittery shadows. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him, the hitchhiker, emerging from the darkness. But there was only empty street and the occasional flicker of movement between the trees. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cold beneath me, and started the engine. The radio crackled with static, then a faint voice announcing a traffic update. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. I knew I should just drive somewhere public, call Jenna, or even the police. But the messages, the warnings, they weren't just random. Someone was watching, someone was orchestrating this, and I was already caught in the web. The next morning came too quickly, dragging me out of sleep with a headache and the bitter taste of cold coffee still lingering on my tongue. I sat at the kitchen table, eyes heavy, replaying last night's messages over and over. Jenna's words echoed in my mind, "You need proof." But what kind of proof could you offer when the danger was invisible, when the threat was wrapped in shadows and silence? I decided to call Jenna. If anyone could help me untangle this, it was her. Her voice was steady when she answered, but I could hear the concern underneath. "Have you noticed anything new?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yeah. The messages. Someone's watching me. Or maybe it's him. The hitchhiker." There was a pause. "You think he's involved?" "I don't know. But I'm starting to think he isn't just warning me. He's manipulating things, making things happen so I follow his lead. And if I don't..." My voice cracked. "I don't know what happens." Jenna sighed. "You need to get out of there. Find a way to break the pattern before it's too late." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to pack a bag and disappear. But when I looked at the maps spread across the table, the routes all led back to that same stretch of road. It was like a trap with no exit. Later that day, I decided to test the pattern. I drove the route again, this time keeping my phone off and avoiding any checkpoints I'd been warned about. The road was quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and exhaust fumes. I passed the spot where the hitchhiker had stood, but there was no sign of him. No figure waiting in the shadows. Then my phone buzzed. I pulled over to check the message, my fingers trembling. "You're running out of time." A cold sweat broke out across my back. Running out of time for what? I started the car again, heart pounding. The radio crackled with static, then a sudden announcement, a major accident blocking the highway ahead. Traffic was backed up for miles. The hitchhiker's voice echoed in my mind, warning me to take the detour. I hesitated. I knew that detour was where the game had started, where the accidents and checkpoints spiraled into chaos. But if I ignored it, what then? Would I be the next accident? The next target? I followed the detour, the narrow road winding through dense trees that pressed close on both sides. The air smelled like wet leaves and something faintly metallic, maybe the residue of a past crash. My headlights caught a flash of movement. I slammed on the brakes. The hitchhiker stood by the side of the road, his eyes fixed on me. No smile this time. Just a cold, steady gaze. "You're in deeper than you think," he said quietly. I felt the weight of those words settle like a stone in my chest. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice barely more than a whisper. He shrugged, the streetlight casting sharp shadows across his face. "Because someone has to control the chaos. Someone has to keep the pieces in place." I blinked, trying to make sense of the words. But what if I don't want to be part of this? He smiled then, slow and chilling. "You don't get to choose anymore. You made your choice the moment you picked me up." The wind stirred again, cold and sharp. I realized then that there was no going back. No escape from whatever game this was. The hitchhiker wasn't just predicting accidents, he was pushing them, pulling strings behind the scenes, and I was tangled in his web. I locked the car doors and started to drive away, but the feeling didn't leave me. The road ahead was dark, uncertain, and I could hear the quiet whisper of something waiting just beyond the curve. Something that wasn't done with me yet. And I wasn't done with it either. I didn't speak for a long time after I locked the doors. "Why are you doing this?" I'd asked. He said it was about control, about keeping chaos from running loose. But what kind of control depends on accidents, on manipulating lives like pawns? The thought made my stomach churn. He smiled then, slow, deliberate, like a snake unfurling in the grass. "You don't get to choose anymore," he said. "You made your choice the moment you picked me up." I gripped the wheel tighter, nails digging into the leather. The car was no longer just a machine, it was a cage, and I was trapped inside with a man who saw the world like a chessboard. The road curved sharply, and I slowed instinctively. The headlights caught something moving at the edge of the forest, just a flicker, a shadow. My breath caught. "Did you see that?" I asked, voice low. He glanced sideways, eyes glinting. "You're starting to notice." His smile widened. "Good." I shivered, though the heater was blasting warm air into the cabin. The smell of damp earth and pine seeped through the cracked window, mixing with the stale scent of his jacket. It was enough to make my skin crawl. "What do you want from me?" I said. "If this is a game, what's the end?" He shrugged again, the streetlight catching the sharp angles of his face. "The end is just the beginning. You think I'm just saving lives? That I'm the hero? No. I'm the hand that moves the pieces. Sometimes you have to break a few to keep the board intact." I swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising in my throat. His words weren't just cryptic, they were a threat. I was no longer a passenger. I was a participant in something darker, something I didn't understand but couldn't escape. We drove on, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. The radio crackled with static, then a faint voice announcer cutting in to warn about a police checkpoint up ahead. The hitchhiker tapped the dashboard, smirking. "See? Told you." I glanced at him sharply. "Are you telling me you planned this? The checkpoint, the accidents?" He nodded slowly. "Not exactly planned, but directed. Nudged. People think it's random, but it's not. It's all connected." The idea made my head spin. If he was right, if every accident and checkpoint was orchestrated, then how many lives had been caught in his web? How many had been sacrificed for his version of order? My hands trembled. "Why involve me?" "Because you're the only one who listens. The only one who believes. And because I need you to keep the pattern." He looked at me with something almost like affection, twisted and cold. "You're part of the machine now." I wanted to scream, to slam on the brakes and throw him out. But the road was slick with rain, and the night pressed in too close. I was trapped not just by him, but by the choices I'd already made. Then the headlights flared in the distance, another accident, just as he had predicted. I slowed, heart hammering. The scene was chaotic, flashing hazard lights, people standing by the roadside, voices raised in panic. A family's car had spun out, wedged against the guardrail. "Stop," I said, pulling over behind the wreck. The hitchhiker didn't move, just watched with those cold eyes. "We have to help." He shrugged. "We'll help, but on my terms." I stepped out into the rain, the cold biting through my jacket. The smell of burnt rubber and wet asphalt filled the air, cold and heavy with silence, mixing with the metallic tang of spilled coolant. The family looked shaken but unharmed. I helped the mother steady her crying child while the father paced, muttering about calling for a tow. Behind me, the hitchhiker stayed silent, watching the road like a hawk. Then he spoke, voice low. "If you hadn't slowed down here, you'd have been the next one to crash. I saved you. Or did you set it up so I'd be here?" I asked, turning sharply. "Are you controlling everything?" He smiled again, that slow, chilling smile. "Control isn't about force. It's about anticipation. Predicting reactions, steering outcomes. You're part of that now. You can't back out." A sudden noise made me spin around, a car approaching fast, headlights blinding. The driver swerved, tires screeching on wet asphalt, narrowly missing the accident scene. Shouts rose from the people nearby. The hitchhiker's eyes flicked to me. "See? Chaos waits for the smallest mistake." I felt the cold press of reality. Chaos wasn't just something to be controlled. It was a living thing, hungry and unpredictable. And I was tangled in its teeth. Back in the car, the rain hammered the roof like a drum. The hitchhiker leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's someone else watching. Someone who doesn't like the way the pieces are moving." My pulse shot up. "Who?" He shook his head. "Not who. What? The system. The people who benefit from chaos." The weight of his words settled in my chest like a stone. If this was a game, I was a piece, but so were they, the ones who thrived on disorder, on fear. And they were watching me now. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of wet black disappearing into the mist. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Every turn, every shadow felt like a trap. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. He smiled, slow, chilling, patient. "Forward. Into the darkness. Because the light's already gone out." The rain had finally tapered off by the time I pulled into the empty parking lot of the all-night diner. He didn't say much as we stepped inside, just a quiet shuffle of his boots on the linoleum floor. The diner was nearly deserted, the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional clink of dishes the only sounds breaking the stillness. I ordered black coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. He sipped his tea, eyes fixed on the window, watching the night like it might spill secrets. "I don't know how many more of these drives I can take," I said, voice low. "Every warning, every accident we avoided, it's like I'm moving pieces on a board I don't fully understand." I traced a crack in the table with a finger. "And now you say someone else is watching. The system. The people who want chaos." I glanced at him. "What does that even mean?" He shrugged, that slow, unsettling smile lingering. "It means that for every accident we prevent, for every checkpoint we dodge, someone else's plan shifts. They don't want order. Not really. They profit from the chaos. They need it to stay alive." His voice was calm, almost casual, but I felt the weight behind it. The kind of knowledge that digs under your skin and makes you itch for answers you're not sure you want. I thought about the driver I'd seen earlier, pulled over by the cops after a near miss that should have been fatal. The way the hitchhiker had predicted that checkpoint told me to slow down, to take the next exit. It had worked. Lives saved. But at what cost? Because right after, I caught sight of a black SUV tailing us, not from the road, but from the shadows of the trees lining the highway. "Do you think they know about you?" I finally asked. "About what you can do." He looked at me then, eyes sharper than before. "They know enough." The words settled between us like a thick fog. I could feel the air grow colder, the room, with its faint smell of dust and decay, shrinking until it felt like the walls were closing in. I wanted to push back against it, to stand tall and say I wasn't afraid. But my hands trembled on the edge of the table. "Then what now?" I whispered. "Do we just keep running? Keep dodging until they catch us?" He leaned forward, voice dropping to a near whisper. "No. We take control. We use what we have to change the game." The idea was tempting. Dangerous, but tempting. I wanted to believe we could outsmart those who thrived on chaos. But the hitchhiker's calm was unnerving, like a predator sizing up its next move. I couldn't tell if he was leading me out of the dark or deeper into it. After a long pause, I finally said, "I'm tired. I'm so tired of feeling like a pawn." He smiled again, but it wasn't warm. Sometimes, the best way to stop being a pawn is to become the player. The next morning, the sunlight filtered weakly through the diner's grimy windows, casting a pale glow over the empty booths. I sat alone, nursing a second cup of coffee, the taste bitter and hollow. The hitchhiker was gone. No note, no sign he'd ever been there except the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air, a dry, sharp smell that reminded me of winter mornings. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious. Cars passed by, people hurried to work, and the rain-washed streets glistened under the tentative sun. But I felt changed. The weight of the night clung to me like a second skin, and the shadows in my mind refused to let go. I thought about everything he'd said, the warnings, the accidents, the invisible forces pulling at the threads of the world around me. And I realized I wasn't sure if I'd helped save lives or simply played into a larger, darker plan. The line between protector and target had blurred until I couldn't see the edges. Driving home, the roads looked the same, but the silence was different. Every flicker of movement, every distant sound, felt like a signal. The system was still watching. Still waiting. I pulled over at a gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror above the sinks. The face staring back was tired, pale, and haunted. I touched a faint bruise just below my jaw, a reminder that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As I refilled my tank, a radio crackled from inside the convenience store. The voice was calm, routine, but my ears caught the words, "Traffic cleared, no incidents reported. Proceed with caution." I smiled, a slow, bitter smile. The chaos had paused, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it roared back. And I wasn't sure if I'd be ready. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being ready wasn't about knowing what was coming. Maybe it was about walking forward, eyes open, into the darkness, because the light was already gone. The hitchhiker had vanished, but the echoes of his warnings lingered. In the patterns of passing cars, in the quiet spaces between moments, in the way the world seemed to hold its breath just before disaster. I wasn't sure if I was helping him anymore, or if I'd become part of the system he warned me about, the very chaos he claimed to despise. Either way, there was no turning back. Not now. Silence settled over the highway as I merged back onto the road, the engine humming steadily beneath me. The horizon stretched wide and empty, a cold promise that the next turn might bring salvation or ruin. And all I could do was keep driving, hoping the pieces would fall where they were meant to. Because in the end, that's all any of us really have. The road ahead, and the choices we make while we're still moving.